I'm Daisy Okoye, and you're listening to Kinda Sorta Brown with the University of Chicago's Public Policy Podcast. Hello, everyone. This is Lena, and I'm so excited to be in your ears for this edition of Kinda Sorta Brown's second mini episode of the season. Today's episode, we'll be talking about Decolonizing Diet. This episode is personal to me, but I know for many of our listeners. Food gives life. Food has life. Food has the power to welcome, share, and connect, crossing the cultural divides that our world has become fixated in. In America today, we consume food in a lot of ways, and not just through our mouths. The phrase, "the camera eats first," mobs the media. From Instagram food porn accounts to mukbangs on YouTube to the constant production of new Netflix cooking showdowns that really, truly seem never ending. Our society is constantly in the face of food. It's hard to imagine that the era of freak shakes, acai bowls, and charcuterie boards that food is used as a weapon. Today, I'm taking us into a deep dive into the intimate relationships that we have with our own food and how our government and society at large structurally manufacture and perpetuate food insecurities that colonize and taint these meaningful and important relationships we have with food. Tambra Raye, the founder of WANDA, Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietitian, and Agriculture. We will have a conversation with her later this episode during the Brown Breakdown to discuss how we can reclaim and decolonize our minds, our diets, and our systems moving forward. And I want to preface this episode to say that this story impacts us all. Regardless of your experiences with food, this story involves every member of our society because food is personal. And the story that you have with food is personal, and we want to talk about reclaiming that relationship. In the States, we don't want to think that our overstuffed American selves as a society where 1 in 10 households will experience food insecurities annually. However, this again is just one narrative written that is not real for many others. The relationship we have with food is our own, but in a world of inequality, it is controlled by dominating systems of power. So let's get into it.
Let's dig into the Melanin Archives.
If you went to a public school, you dealt with the food industrial complex. I like to think of this system as the colonizer. So back in 1992, the U.S. Department of Agriculture released the notorious food pyramid, an attempt to guide Americans in which foods were healthy and which foods weren't, focusing on what foods Americans should be eating, more or less. This stuff was slapped everywhere. At my Florida public elementary school, it was on the little cartons that you'd get to hold your meal, to a little carton of milk. I sat in my beautiful elementary school eating my sugary, free 99, yes, free with an F, breakfast of a graham cracker sandwich filled with PB&J. Truly a classic. A nutritious breakfast? Maybe not. But that food item and so many others were given to students because they were deemed as healthy and a good option for kids to start their days by the government. The food pyramid, and now the updated food plate, released in 2011, was influenced and created by food lobbyists whose decisions weren't motivated by the health of American children, but by their companies' pockets. Companies motivated by profit margins and politicians motivated by securing their coin has led to the access of food to be a decision removed from the individual. Communities rely on government programs and schools for their meals and groceries. Their options become controlled by what the government offers, thus emboldening the food industrial complex that I've been naming. It is a system motivated by the nature of our economy and government that has evaded to consider the people they supposedly represent, questioning whether the idea of a conscious consumer can even exist in a system that rigs what is available to be consumed in the first place. Now let's get into this tea of this graham cracker sandwich. KST. It's piping hot. Our world is not at a shortage of food. I want to make that very clear. This is a crisis of access that is at question. The redirection of resources are institutionalized and controlled by systems at play, such as governments, large corporations, lobbyist groups, you pick your poison. The relationships that as individuals we have with food have been compromised by larger dominating factors at play. They have colonized our systems, our relationships with food, hijacking local economies and community members' opportunity to develop food independence. And people always want to talk about the lack, but never go up the pipeline to see how and who are causing these distress in our communities. Why do we focus on the effects when we need to look at the cause? The narrative of the struggling, poor, and working class American communities sells. All these groups I mentioned before that have colonized our food system, creating the food industrial complex, benefiting, namely profiting from those stories. This is how I see it. It's like if a mayor said, I support Black Lives Matter, and then saying that they're going to help the community feel that they are quote unquote heard, but then ordering more police at protests to suppress the majority's voices and condone violence instigated by police. Their public objective being one thing while their actions being another for personal gain. Oh wait, that exists. Thanks, Mayor Lightfoot. Anyway, thanks for dealing with my joke, but here's the real tea. We need to decolonize not only our systems, but our minds, our lives. This is where Decolonizing Diet comes in. The name of this episode and how I want to reframe food. We talked about in the Melanin Archives what the food industrial complex essentially is just another form of colonization. Side note, the way that word follows me in all intersections of my life is truly ridiculous. We're constantly being colonized by whitewashed history, how we see our hair, as Hope mentioned in the texturism episode, the way medical practices have been run by archaic racist history, like the world really said, I'm gonna take it over from here. Colonization is not a new phenomenon, or decolonization for that matter. I want us to decolonize our diet and our ideas that we have with food. The colonizer, the politician, and the big corporations, they have taken the power away from people to have agency in their own communities by creating an economy that is reliant on them for food. We need to decolonize our minds and ourselves, and Tambra is going to talk a little bit more about that when we break it down in the Brown Breakdown. Y'all like to play on words? Let's get into it.
It's the Brown Breakdown.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Tambra Raye Stevenson, and she's the founder of WANDA, Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietitians, and Agriculture, which build a platform and pipeline to amplify the voices of hidden figures in the food system through education, advocacy, and innovative technology in Africa and here in the diaspora. She's currently serving as the NAACP DC Health Chair, where nutrition justice has been the focus for over the last 4 years. Their work was recognized in 2017 by the NAACP National Convention with the Dr. William Cobb Advocacy Award. She's currently serving as a second PhD student in an accelerated program at American University School of Communication. Thank you so much, Tambra, for being with us, and I'm so excited to dive into this question. Tambra, the first thing I want to ask is just, could you tell me a little bit about yourself? What motivated you to get into this work of centering food, and more specifically, centering ourselves and our relationships with food?
For me, I was a girl growing up in Oklahoma and had concerns of health challenges that impacted my family, from like diabetes to heart disease, throat cancer. And so I thought medicine was a pathway to make an impact. But it was not until college that, as a bio-pre-med major, that I learned about nutrition as a field, and that it was more than just Betty Crocker. It was, connected to medicine. And so food being as medicine was revolutionary in my mind, and, making that connection of playing like I had a restaurant in my mom's kitchen, not realizing that that could have turned into this healing food sanctuary beyond just serving whatever her leftovers were the night before. So I dived into nutrition research, realizing this was a science really centered or, rooted in biochemistry and metabolism, and realized how this was fascinating. But the turn for me in terms of food being more than just science, but its culture, its identity, its community, that took a much further along my journey of just self-discovery to get to that point. Really fast forward after my dad died in 2007, and searching for my own understanding of my authentic self, and having that go into learning my family history, doing the ancestry test with African ancestry, and traveling back to Nigeria in the north in particular was where, for me, that connection. And yoga for me was the pathway to get to that understanding that I need to understand who am I? Literally, that was the repeated phrase we would say in our retreat. Who am I? Who am I? And it was almost like a lightning rod hitting me. You might as well thought I was going to bolt out the door on this, journey, like, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, like, who am I? And on this discovery, I go through the lens of food. I began searching, who am I? And questioning and wondering, how does food become an extension, a metaphor, a reflection of my values, my identity, and not really having the language at the time, but I just knew I wanted to reclaim myself, and food was a way to do that. Changing, going back to my natural hair was a pathway to do that. Changing my home, having it reflect me, like it became essentially one of many wheels in my holistic health journey. And partly for, the what's in it for me factor, I just didn't want to die from things that were preventable that I saw in my own family. And I wanted to take control of the things that were within my reach. And so food became one of those things that I felt I had some control. And so I began unpacking the systemic oppression and apartheid systems that are in place that, really just like a game of think about, we have some choice of how we win, but having gone through now in a PhD program and being in a game lab, you're really only given the options that are put in front of you. And that's pretty much how our food system has been. And so for me, it's been challenging that thought of what are the options, and maybe we should challenge the options that are provided.
I see that in there's one quote that you said, I turned my pain to purpose. And you're kind of talking about this journey and this lifestyle. And I mean, we talked prior, but just with my own journey of claiming food as it's not just one part of it. It's also who I am. It's how I interact with people. It's my culture. It's my community. But I think this idea of pain to purpose is sometimes an interesting relationship, especially with people of color, because it's why do we have to experience this pain to know our purpose? Why do we have to deal with the struggles of these hard relationships in our food system? And I was wondering, as we claim this freedom, but more for ourselves, how did you do that? How do you encourage people to do that who feel why is this pain necessary?
I mean, it's kind of goes back to the work of the cultural mythologist Joseph Campbell I mentioned, but we all have this human journey, and we've seen it in different forms of Holy Scripture, depending on your religion or not, if you're spiritual or not. But the journey of man or woman is very similar in terms of the stages that we go through. And we've been given a formula, a roadmap to understand what we will experience. And for those who don't have the roadmap, this is where we at a young age, battle depression, suicide, and it's important to have those allies, those mentors to help guide you, to have that embarking of self-discovery. And so for those who see food as one way for them, like me, it was really unpacking, what we call decolonizing our diet kind of conversation. What does that really mean? What is colonization? What has been the impact on our food system that we haven't really been centered in our academics to understand, let alone just plain language conversations with our family and friends. But in my first semester, I made an attempt to dive into that conversation through a paper, and it was looking at the issue of jollof rice and understanding how did we get to this dish, but also how was colonialism reflected in it. And so the three areas of colonization was that I've identified in looking at the literature was erasure, extraction, and exploitation. And so when we think about the work now with WANDA that I do of giving a platform and a pipeline for Black women and girls in the food system to unlift that veil of and rethink their image and narrative, that's part of unpacking that erasure of the hidden figures behind the food. That we love the food, we love the culture, but what about the people? And so that's one. Extraction is when we only value the food itself. Think about the food porn across social media, Instagram. You see these beautiful, vibrant photos of food, but what about all the people and other elements that played into creating that dish? And so we become desensitized of the system, the labor, the spiritual, the ritual that food represent, the healing aspect of